Scream.
Scream 7 is the latest horror slasher flick to hit theaters. This film is, of course, the 7th entry into the Scream franchise, a franchise that I have loved for almost my entire life, because when I was a young boy, I remember watching over my dad's shoulder as he was flipping through channels on TV, and Scream 1 was on TV, and it was the moment where Sidney Prescott herself is in a closet, jumps out with an umbrella, stabbing Billy Loomis, and that was a pretty scary moment for me as a young child, but it always made me excited to watch those Scream movies in the future. Of course, eventually I would watch each and every one of the Scream movies, and I love those movies, so much in fact that Scream 7 is on my top 10 most anticipated movies list for 2026. And over the last month on this channel, I've been watching and reviewing the entire Scream franchise, so if you guys haven't had a chance to check out my thoughts on the other films, well, after you watch this video, I would love for you guys to check out my thoughts on all of the other movies in this franchise. That being said, this 7th installment is directed by Kevin Williamson, who of course had written several installments into this franchise before, but had never directed one of them, and how he got to the director's chair is a story in and of itself, and I'll try to keep that story brief, but essentially the directors known as Radio Silence, who had directed both Scream 5 and 6, walked away from the franchise after Scream 6, saying that they wanted a break, wanted to move on to other things, but the studio wanted to move full speed ahead with Scream 7, so they replaced those directors with the director Christopher Landon, who of course has directed some great horror films in the past, like Freaky and Happy Death Day 1 and 2. So with him involved in this franchise, I was excited to see what he was going to do with this new cast of characters that had been introduced to us in Scream 5 and 6, but then, after some social media outrage and some things that had happened with Melissa Barrera in real life, well, the studio decided to part ways with Melissa Barrera, leaving the franchise without its new main star. But it wasn't just Melissa Barrera who was out at this point, because a couple of short weeks later, we found out that Jenna Ortega had walked away from the Scream franchise. Now, she stated that it was a scheduling conflict with other things she had going on, but a lot of people speculated it was to stand in solidarity with Melissa Barrera. So now your two main stars from Scream 5 and 6, sisters in those movies, are now out of the franchise, and then Christopher Landon announced that he was also walking away from Scream 7 because some absolutely ridiculous people sent him death threats to not only Christopher Landon, but also his family, and he didn't want to be part of that toxic Scream 7 atmosphere, so now the director had walked away from the franchise. And that is how we have made our way to Kevin Williamson finally directing a Scream film. Now, I'm not happy about why Christopher Landon felt that he needed to walk away from the franchise. I'm not happy about the way the studio parted ways with Melissa Barrera and eventually Jenna Ortega, but because of all of that, we now have Kevin Williamson in the director's chair, and we are going back to Neve Campbell, who had been left out of Scream 6 over a payment conflict. Essentially, she wanted to get paid more, and the studio said, no, we've got new stars in the franchise. Well, now those new stars are gone, so in comes Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott once again. So with Kevin Williamson in place as the director and the old main cast returning as the new main cast of Scream 7, well, all the pieces were in place, and the only question I had at this point was Kevin Williamson the right person to pick to be the writer and director? Well, let's do the review for Scream 7.
Here we go.
That is one big pile of shit.
No, I shot him. Bullets in the fall killed him.
So Scream 7 opens up in Woodsboro at the Mocker House. Well, not the Mocker House anymore. Now it's the Mocker Airbnb, because someone bought Stu Mocker's old house and they turned it into an Airbnb attraction, which is really dark when you think about it, because in the Scream universe, the Mocker House is a place where people have been murdered by Ghostface killers and where Ghostface killers have also been killed. But like I said, our story opens up at the Mocker Airbnb when a couple pulls up to the house. They put the code in the door, they get the key, and you can tell that the guy is super excited about this experience, where the girl he's with is just kind of along for the ride. She doesn't find it very entertaining, because this is a place, again, in their universe where people have really died. They make their way into the house, and the house is all decked out in Ghostface paintings, portraits, there's masks, knives, all kinds of things all over the house, making it an experience for fans of these horrible tragedies. And so as they're getting settled in, you find out there's an actual Ghostface killer in the house. And I don't feel like this is spoiler territory because all of this is in the trailer. I promise this is a no spoilers review. I will not spoil anything big within this film. But a couple of Ghostface phone calls later, and this couple is taken out by the new Ghostface killer, who then burns Stumacher's house to the ground. After this gory and fiery opening to Scream 7, we are then transported to where the rest of our story will take place, the fictional town of Pine Grove, Indiana. And as someone from Indiana, I think it's really cool that Indiana's getting some love in a Scream franchise. More on that in my positives. But from there, we're reintroduced to Sidney Prescott, who now goes by Sydney Evans, as she married her husband Mark Evans, and Mark is played by Joel McHale. And Mark is a police officer in Pine Grove, and it makes a lot of sense that she decided to marry a guy in law enforcement, someone who could protect her from a potential Ghostface killer down the road. But they're not living alone. They have children. Of course, we've seen some of her younger children in Scream 5 as she was pushing them in a stroller. They are at Grandma's house for the duration of this film, but their teenage daughter, Tatum Evans, is living in the house with them for the duration of this film, and Tatum is played by Isabel May. And if you're a big fan of the Scream franchise, the name Tatum might seem familiar because Tatum was the name of Sidney's best friend in Scream 1, the friend that got dragged up by that garage door when she was murdered by one of the Ghostface killers. So she was named after Sidney's best friend, and that really plays into some of the emotional balance of this film between Sidney and Tatum. But with a new Ghostface killer on the loose, you know where this story is going to go. Eventually, the Ghostface killer will show up on Sidney's doorstep, but this time it's done a little bit differently. See, this time the Ghostface killer says he's not hiding behind a mask. Once that reveal happens early on in this film, well, that is when this story goes in a crazy direction that I don't want to spoil, so I will just leave my thoughts on the synopsis of Scream 7 right there. You now have the setting of Pine Grove, Indiana. You have Sydney and her daughter Tatum. You have her husband Mark, and you have Gale Weathers coming back to town once she hears that there's a Ghostface killer, but she's flanked with previous people from this franchise. Chad and Mindy, the brother and sister combo from Scream 5 and 6, now work for Gale as cameramen, essentially just following her around, trying to get the story with her. And it wouldn't be a Scream movie without a teenager with a bunch of teenage friends, and of course Tatum has a bunch of teenage friends, including a boyfriend that likes to come through her window, which of course automatically is a red flag to you, the viewer, because typically when there's a boyfriend that likes to come through the window, well, that person is definitely a suspect in a Scream movie. So with all of these characters in place and a new Ghostface killer on the loose, we now have a setting for Scream 7. And that is the best synopsis that I can give you for Scream 7. If that sounds like a fun time, well, then you should definitely check this movie out on the biggest screen possible. It is currently playing in theaters, and I would definitely recommend checking it out on a big screen. Some of the kills definitely deserve that big screen viewing from the audience. Now, I'm going to get into my positives and my negatives for Scream 7 here in a second, but before I do that, if this is the first time you found my channel, well, would love for you guys to hit that subscribe button, check out all the different content that I have. Whether you like movie reviews, Blu-ray talk, or even ranked list videos, I've got a little bit of everything on my channel, and I'd love for you guys to check it out. All right, let's get into my positives and my negatives for Scream 7.
I'm gonna burn it all down. Mother!
My first positive for this movie is probably something that's near and dear to my heart and other people from the Midwest, but probably not everybody that went to go see this movie this weekend, and that is the Midwest setting of this Scream film. See, most of the Scream franchise is set in California. Of course, Scream 6 was set in New York, in the Big Apple around Halloween, but the attraction of New York was the fact that they were in New York City with a Ghostface killer. So one of the things I really loved about this movie was the atmosphere of Indiana in the fall, the crunching leaves, the fog rolling in at night, the Midwest town that they were in. It's a positive I had about Clown in a Cornfield. Now, that was a dying Midwest town, but they really captured that Midwest atmosphere in Clown in a Cornfield, and I think they captured that again in Scream 7. The setting for Scream 7 really reminded me of my own town that I currently live in Indiana, especially in the fall with the leaves and the shops in town and people walking around. It just really reminded me of where I live, and it had to be a positive for this movie.
Proving once again there is more than corn in Indiana.
That's true, there's more than corn in Indiana.
Now, this is a Scream film, and it's not Scream 3 where they intentionally tone down both the blood and the violence, so my next positive for this movie is going to be the blood and the violence throughout this movie. If you're a slasher fan, and especially a fan of Ghostface killing people in brutal ways, well then I really think you'll love how the Ghostface killer goes about killing people in this movie. Now, I won't give any specifics away about who is getting killed in these scenes, but there's two scenes in particular that I think are some of the best kills in the entire franchise. One of them involves a girl who is being pulled up on stage by strings. She's essentially practicing for a play that's coming up in her high school, but Ghostface gets a hold of those wires that are holding her up, and he starts swinging her back and forth on the stage, and then goes beneath her with a knife and starts slicing and dicing. It is a really gory scene, and the other one takes place in a bar. If you've seen this film, you know which one I'm talking about, because there's a couple kills in that bar, but one of them in particular having to do with one of the taps for the beer that's coming out. Oh my God, that is a great kill, and it's so well done. So again, if you're there for the kills, or if you love your slasher movies for the blood and violence, well then you will love Scream 7 for those reasons. My next positive for this movie is the emotional storyline of mother and daughter between both Sidney and Tatum. See, Tatum is the same age that Sidney was in the first Scream film, and she's going through a lot of the same things that Sidney was going through in that first Scream film. She has a boyfriend, he likes to sneak through her window, she's trying to hide it from her parents. At the same time, you, the viewer, are very skeptical of this boyfriend, and so is Sidney, because of course her boyfriend was Billy Loomis, who tried to kill her and killed so many of her friends. And so there's a struggle at the beginning of this film between both mother and daughter, but not just because of a Ghostface killer, just because, well, you got a mother and teenage daughter, and sometimes they clash in real life. And so I thought they did a really great job sort of building that tension between the two of them, only to have the two of them work together towards the end of this film. And again, I'll leave out specifics, but I really loved the relationship that they had within this film. I thought Isabel May did a great job as Tatum, and I thought just naming her Tatum because, oh, well, that was my best friend's name of Tatum was kind of weak for the story. But then when they explain it within the film, and when Sidney has this heart-to-heart moment with her daughter about why she named her Tatum, oh, that was so emotionally well done, and I had to make it a positive. And that brings me to my final positive of this film, and that is the use of previous people from this franchise. Now, again, very spoiler-free, so I won't say exactly how they're used, but I thought they were used really well. I know a lot of people are going to dislike this. This is something that a lot of people are going to wish was in my negatives because they didn't like the way that previous characters were used. And I guess I'll say this. I understand if you didn't like the way these characters were used, but it worked for me. I thought the way they were used was clever, and I thought the way they were used was also something that sort of mirrored how our society is in 2026. Now, should they have announced that some of these characters were coming back before the reveal of them in Scream 7? Absolutely not. I can't wait to get many years down the road where I'm showing my own children the Scream films one day, and they have no idea that some of these people are coming back. Because if you're online at all like I am, well, then you know several of the people from the past are coming back, and you kind of scratch your head because you know these people were not only killed, but they were double tapped in the head. Like, you're like, there's no way these people could come back, but it's done in a really unique way, and again, one that mirrors our own society in 2026, so that's why it's a positive for me. That'll do it for my positives. Now we have to move over to my negatives, and my first negative for this movie is going to be that this film pretty much ditches the idea of this movie being a meta commentary on current horror films of our time. Now, it is a meta commentary on society in 2026. I just talked about that in my previous positive, so if that's enough for you, I guess that'll work for you. But I've always loved how the Scream films would talk about current horror films, how current horror films shaped Scream 7, and this movie really gets away from that. Of course, Mindy is the resident movie nerd of the group, and at one point in this movie, she does try to talk about how this Scream story is nostalgia for the audience, but then she's quickly cut off by Chad talking about, hey, we're not going to do that this time around, and then they move on. They don't really go into horror movie rules of our time. They don't go into meta commentary on other horror movies that are impacting themes in Scream 7, and that was a bit disappointing. Yes, they did quickly get out, oh, well, this time around it's all about nostalgia, and Scream 7 really is all about nostalgia, but it's just so quick and it's so brief, and they just move past it so quickly that it's a negative for me. I like when they live in the meta horror commentary genre with a Scream film, and this film, it just didn't do that for me. My next negative for this movie is something that I had a negative for in Scream 6, and that is a couple couple of our main characters having extreme plot armor. Essentially, they can get stabbed, sliced and diced so many times, they can look dead, but at the end of the film, they will be standing tall and they'll be joking around with each other, and it just bothers me that not only did they do that again, but they did it with the same damn characters. I won't get into specifics, but there are a couple of characters in this movie that look absolutely dead by the Ghostface killers, and at the end of the movie, they're standing tall because they have to be, because this franchise is afraid of killing off those characters. Why? I'm not really sure, because they were basically background characters this time around, but they brought them back anyway to Scream 7, and they made sure they were alive by the end of the film. And that just annoys me. I don't know why they bothered bringing some of those people back from Scream 5 and 6 only to just keep them around by the end of 7. Killing them would have had a little bit of impact. Killing them would have said, oh, okay, so nobody's safe again. But once again, here we are with these characters that have so much plot armor, they cannot die. Speaking of choices for characters that really annoyed me, my next negative has to do with Gale Weathers. Gale Weathers comes into this movie, and it's not really clear how she knew to come into town, but whatever. She gets into town because she's Gale Weathers. She brings Chad and Mindy with her, so she's bringing in more people for the Ghostface killer to go after. And so now that they're on scene, she's with Sydney throughout this film, and then at a certain point, her character is just gone. Like, they didn't write anything for Gale Weathers, which is kind of crazy because Kevin Williamson has done such a great job anytime he's written a Scream film, but it feels like they just didn't know what to do with Gale this time around. Yes, she's useful when she first comes in. Yes, she's useful in the middle act of this movie, but the main act of this film really feels like they needed to focus on Sydney and Tatum, and while I enjoyed that emotional journey that the two of them went on, they just kind of left the other characters to the side, especially Gale Weathers, somebody that was literally with Sydney in 1 minute and then just doesn't show up till the end of the movie. And while I'm not trying to spoil things, I don't think that really spoils it. It's just they don't use Gale Weathers appropriately in this movie. And that leads to my final negative in Scream 7, and that is that the killer reveal didn't feel special the way that it should have felt. Listen, I know I went into this movie with high expectations. I knew what I wanted going into this movie, and so maybe those expectations helped play into this negative, but the killer reveal in this movie is very lackluster, which really pains me to say because I haven't really felt like that for a Scream film outside of Scream 3. I didn't really love the long lost brother storyline from Scream 3. I didn't buy into it as much as other killer reveals in this franchise, and I know a lot of people had an issue with the Scream 6 killer reveal. I never really had that problem because I saw Scream 6 as a movie that was trying to do what Scream 2 did, so when you had a vengeful parent in the mix there, it kind of made sense to me. But this film really goes in a different direction from the rest of the franchise, and the killer reveal was just lackluster. Like, when the Ghostface killer reveals who they are, I just didn't feel anything. I just felt like, oh, that's it. No, there's got to be something else. Like, there's going to be like another, that's it. Like, that's how I felt in the theater. It just wasn't exciting. I wasn't like, oh my God, that person. I didn't feel that. And I have felt that in the Scream franchise. I have felt that in films that Kevin Williamson himself has written. So I know he can give us a great killer reveal, and it just wasn't great. It was what it was. It was like, oh, all right, well, killer reveal. Okay. And I really don't feel like that's how I should feel at the killer reveal of a Scream movie. That's always supposed to be the big moment of the film. That's something where when you watch it in the future with someone who hasn't watched it, you put it in and you wait for that moment just to get their reaction. Somebody that they didn't see coming that actually matters to the plot of the film, not what we get in Scream 7. And that is the most spoiler-free way that I can frame that. Hopefully I didn't give too much away with my thoughts there. Overall, I had a good time with this movie, not a great time. There were some things that I really enjoyed. The positives that I had for this movie are really strong, but I also feel like the negatives I have for this movie are equally as strong. I've always looked at the Scream franchise as a franchise that has great entries in it and good entries, no bad entries. And so I think this film continues that trend, but I would put Scream 7 more toward the good entry side of the Scream franchise rather than the great entry. Something that I can rewatch in the future, something that does have some very redeemable qualities about it, like the kills, like the Indiana atmosphere, the character development of both Sydney and her daughter. Like, I thought all of that really worked for me. But again, my negatives are very strong in this film as well. So while I wouldn't call this a bad movie, I wouldn't call it a great movie either. I would say Scream 7 is a good film. Would I recommend Scream 7 to you guys in theaters? Well, if you're a big fan of the Scream franchise, definitely check this out on the big screen. If you're a big fan of slasher horror flicks, then definitely check this out on a big screen. If you're just a casual fan, maybe you're not a big fan of the Ghostface killer idea, well then you could wait for this one on streaming, and I think you'd have a fun time with it. But as always, guys, those are just my opinions because that's my review for Scream 7. Have you guys had a chance to see this film yet? If you have, let me know in the comment section down below. Let me know where we agree, where we disagree, what your thoughts are, and of course, we can talk spoilers in that comment section. And finally, guys, if you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button because it helps the video, it helps the channel, and it helps me right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Alright guys, we got to the end of my Scream 7 review. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, if you haven't checked out my channel in a while, I have reviewed all of the Scream films in the last month, so all of my thoughts on this franchise are currently on my channel, and I will be putting out a full ranked list of the entire Scream franchise in the next couple of days, so keep an eye on my channel for that in the future. Until then, if you want to check out any of the other content on my channel, well, I've got all of my Scream movie reviews right there, and I've got all of my horror movie reviews right there.